everyone, I'm going to be going over how to composite in a mist effect in Blender. So when you're compositing, it takes place between the first render and then the render to video, so just an intermediate stage. And so again, there can be some setup ahead of time. So I have my render settings all set. I've selected my own output location, and I am going to be changing the format to the OpenEXR multi-layer because that is the only format that saves the additional information that we need depending on the effect that we're going for. Now for mist, I'm just going to come over to the view layers and I'm going to enable some different passes to help create the mist effect. Now, depending on what specific type of compositing you're doing, sometimes you need to have several different passes. So for mist, we want to have combined, we want to have Z for depth, and then we want to have mist. Now, there's some additional setup beyond just the passes. So I'm going to come over to the camera and then the camera settings. And under viewport display, there's this little mist checkbox, and that gives the camera this line that just represents the range where the mist is going to display. And so this beginning is the starting point of the mist where it starts to become visible, and the end of the line is the end point of the mist where you can no longer see things. It's so thick. So we can adjust the start and the end of the range of mist over in the world settings under mist pass. This is only going to be available if you've enabled the mist pass over here. So just be aware of that. So 3 places we work with mist: in the view layer, having that pass checked, checking it in the viewport display for the camera, and then over in the world settings, we can determine where the mist is going to start and at what point the mist is getting so thick we're no longer really seeing it. So maybe something like that. I'm going to head back over to my output settings, and I'm just going to choose one of the middle frames, maybe 25. And I'm going to just render a single test frame because I may decide that I need my start and ending position for the mist to be different. So I don't want to take the time to render out the full sequence and realize, oh, I need to come back and make changes. So I'm just going to render the animation. Because I have a single frame, it is only going to render that single frame. And as soon as that is finished, I'll pull it into a compositing file. All right, my render is finished. I'm just going to save my file and make a new general file with Command N. I can ignore everything in the scene, and I'm just going to head over to Compositing. I need to check Use Nodes. So we have the Composite node, which determines what's in the actual output. And I'm going to just delete render layers, so I'm selecting that and then X. And I'm going to replace it, Shift A, with an image node. I like to just search. It's a lot faster than looking for where the nodes are because there are so many. And I'm just going to open the image that I rendered. So I'm just finding the location and getting that open. And I'm going to add a viewer node so that I can see what I'm doing at a bigger scale. If I connect from combined to the image socket, now I can see the image in the background. Now we have the N panel over here, which is just N to open and close the panel. And under View, I can play around with the scale. I can move to another location if I'm not satisfied with it. So there's some adjustments that I can do there depending on what I need. And just N when I don't want to see the panel anymore, so I have more space. And so from here, I'm going to be adding some additional nodes to actually make the mist show up. So there's a few things I'm going to have. I'm going to start Shift A, just looking for something called alpha over. So this is a node that's used to help blend things together. And I'm just going to let it connect like this. So it's connected from the combined socket to the image socket. If it doesn't place properly, I can move it again, or I can click and drag from socket to socket. I'm also going to connect from image to image over here so that both the viewer and the composite are connected to alpha over. All right, so the combined image is going to be displaying in the background, but the white is going to actually represent the color of the mist. So if you want your mist to be a different color, you could certainly change that right here. All right, next up, I'm going to add a vector curves node, and I'm not going to connect it automatically. I'm just going to put it down over here. And vector is going to connect to factor, and then the other vector is going to be connecting to the mist. So we can see what the mist is looking like with those default settings right now. Actually, I'm just going to zoom a little bit out and move a little bit to the side just to have this be a little bit more clear what's happening. Now, I'm also going to add a math node, so Shift A, searching for math. I'm going to just put it here in between the mist socket and vector curves, and I'm going to change the operation to multiply. And I can experiment with different numbers here, but you can see that this really impacts the amount of overall mist in the scene. So I can experiment with what works well for that sort of thing. Now, vector curves is really going to control where the mist actually ends up. So as I start dragging this different directions, you start seeing different amounts of mist in different areas. And so if you want this to be a little more organic, sometimes adjusting just the vector curve can be helpful, and can just be a little bit of experiment to see what actually makes sense. Now, I may decide that my mist just starts too early. I want it to start later. And in that case, I might just go in and adjust the render for the original file. Change my start and stop positions, or the stop position is probably fine, but maybe the start position is just too soon. Or maybe I don't need the multiply node at all, or maybe just for a little bit. So experiment, see what you like the look of, but you can have a huge amount of customization depending just on how your vector curve is set up and the various settings for that. And you can always X out the little circles here that control how the curve behaves if you realize that there's something that you don't need or that you're not happy with. All right, so when I'm satisfied with what I have, or when I realize I need to make a change, either way, I'm just going to save my compositing file. I'm going to give it the same name, just add a C at the end so that I know this is the compositing version of the file instead of the main version of the file. And it's really helpful keeping your compositing separate from the original file, because it saves on processing when you get to the point where you're rendering from this one. And it also just prevents the compositing from overriding the original or the reverse when I don't want it to happen. So it just makes things easier keeping it separate. So I'm just going to return to the original mist file. Again, at this stage, if I decide I want the mist settings to be different, I can continue to adjust the settings. If I'm happy with how everything's working, then in that case, I can render out my full sequence. I'm not going to do the full sequence in this case, just enough to get an idea. All right, so the render is done. I'm just going to save my file and then go back to the compositing version. I'm going to go to the little folder icon, A to select everything. It's in the right order, so I don't have to worry about that. And then just open image. And now you will notice that you can't play through. It does take a little bit of time to calculate, but you can adjust the location of the needle and sort of scrub through just a little bit more slowly. So you don't get the real-time playback, but you can see exactly what's going on. And something Oh, I don't have anything past 25. So I'm actually going to come over to the output settings, put my ending frame here. Now, something that's pretty cool that you can do is you can also animate the settings. So maybe on frame 1, the multiply value is actually at 0. I'd add a keyframe while I'm hovering. Then maybe by frame 10, the mist has turned on to 0.5 while I'm hovering to add a keyframe. And so now the mist is gradually appearing. All right, so anyway, after I've made any adjustments, I'm happy with how all of my images are looking. I've done any additional animation I want to do. Then I'm just ready to actually render. So I can render directly to video because it's not doing a ton of processing like it is when we're normally rendering. I do want to choose the video format. If I want to make any changes to the encoding, I can change that here. And I do recommend, if you've made any changes to the resolution, just make sure that they match what you did in the original file. And so now I can just render the animation. Again, it's very quick going through. And when I come over to the desktop, I have my new video. I can play it through and see, and everything's working properly. All right, and that's the basics for compositing mist in Blender.